I can't tell if it was, I mean, I know it's on. I couldn't tell if it was.
So it's not working, right? Hello? Yeah, there you go. So we got about 1 minute. If everybody will find their seat, we'll get this thing started. All right, time to get started. And we're going to start off this morning with Jeff and Lorena on the Hard Clam Fisheries Management Plan, Amendment 3.
I'm gonna start sweating. Here, can we move?
I can switch with you.
Is that okay?
You'll probably want it a little closer because it has trouble.
Okay. Are we ready?
Yeah, don't wait on us. You go ahead and start.
All right, good afternoon, or good morning, Commissioners. My name's Lorena, one of the Clam co-leads, and with me today is Jeff Dobbs, the other co-lead. Today I'll be giving a brief overview of the Hard Clam Base Plan and the Mechanical Harvest Issue Paper, along with draft DMF management recommendations. So for your reference, this is where we are in the FMP development timeline, same as Oyster that you guys heard last night. The action item today is for the Commission to vote on sending the draft Amendment 3 for public, regional, and standing advisory committee review. So today I'll be discussing the goal and objectives for Hard Clam and a characterization of the fishery, overview of Appendix 1, the Mechanical Clam Harvest Issue Paper. Then I'll go over preliminary division recommendations, and lastly will be our action item. So the Commission approved the goal and objectives of Amendment 3 at last year's November meeting. The goal of the North Carolina Hard Clam FMP is to manage the hard clam resource to provide long-term harvest and continue to offer protection and ecological benefits to North Carolina's estuaries. To achieve this goal, it's recommended that the following objectives be met. Use the best available biological, environmental, habitat, fishery, social, and economic data to effectively monitor and manage the hard clam fishery and its environmental role. Manage hard clam harvesting gear use to minimize damage to the habitat. Coordinate with DEQ stakeholders to implement actions and protect habitat and environmental quality consistent with the Coastal Habitat Protection Plan recommendations, also known as CHIP. And promote stewardship of the resource through public outreach and increase public awareness regarding the ecological value of hard clams and encourage stakeholder involvement in the fishery management and habitat enhancement activities. So currently, the available data comes from commercial landings, fish house sampling, and a recreational survey of cruffle holders. This survey does not provide data for the entire recreational clam fishing population. So without complete recreational data, the population size is a biased index. This issue was discussed earlier during the oyster presentation. This is a shared issue between plans. This graph shows North Carolina's commercial hard clam landings and trips from public harvest from 1994 to 2022. And landings and participation have been in steady decline across the entire time period, which mainly is due to market demand. So harvest limits for each sector are as follows. In the commercial fishery, minimum size is 1 inch shell width. A daily limit ranges depending on the area and the gear being used. Hand harvest is open year-round. Mechanical harvest is December 1 to March 31st. This is also rotational depending on the water body. In the recreational fishery, minimum size doesn't change. Harvest limit is 100 clams per day, 200 clams per vessel per day. And as mentioned in the previous slide, landings from this sector cannot be estimated since you do not need a recreational license to harvest clams. This table is showing you the economic impact of the commercial clam fishery in North Carolina from 2013 to 2022. In 2022, the commercial clam fishery in North Carolina supported around 325 full-time and part-time jobs, roughly $1.3 million in income, and roughly $2.9 million in sale impacts. In the last 10 years, the industry has seen declines in landings, participants, and economic impacts. This figure illustrates the age demographics of commercial clammers from the last 10 years. You can see that the age of commercial clammers has increased through time, with the majority of people ranging from 50 to 59, which is in the light blue, and 60 to 69 in the purple. Another trend that can be noted is that those that in the age groups of 49 and below are getting smaller. That is, those ages are represented in the dark green, orange, and navy colored blocks. So you can see that we're not seeing the younger generation entering the fishery. We've previously discussed environmental factors and threats to the hard clams in North Carolina. So just a quick overview. Damage from bottom disturbing gear, which includes dredges and trawls, represents physical threats to hard clams. Soft bottom has historically been considered the most appropriate location to use bottom disturbing gear. However, this gear can create significant turbidity issues that can choke out clams in these habitats. Next are water quality threats. Clams and other bivalves accumulate chemical contaminants, so this is not only a threat to the bivalve itself, but we run the risk of consuming contaminated shellfish. Untreated sewage can also carry disease and can contaminate shellfish. Oh my goodness, what happened? Can I use the mouse? Where's the mouse? Sorry. So where did I leave off? Untreated sewage can also carry diseases that can contaminate clams and cause food poisoning. Then there are environmental pathogens like Vibrio, green algae, and neurotoxic shellfish poisoning that can impact shellfish and be harmful to humans. We always strongly encourage the public to check out our shellfish sanitation website, which is linked here, for more information on closures or recent updates. So I'll now move on to Appendix 1, which is the clam mechanical harvest issue paper. The number of participants and trips in mechanical clam fishery have steadily declined since the 1990s to the lowest level on record. This, along with habitat concerns associated with bottom disturbing gears, as well as resources needed from the state to manage and monitor the fishery, this has caused the division to re-examine the mechanical clam fishery. So some background on this issue paper. Historical mechanical harvest data are sparse until about 1950. When commercial reporting became more regular, harvest during this time peaked over 35 million hard clams in 1951. Following these high landings was a steep decline until the late 1960s. And then in the late 1970s, there was another increase in landings as there was more demand for North Carolina clams due to abnormally thick ice in the northern states. Then in the late 1980s, landings have continued to decline. This decline is likely the result of a decrease in abundance, increase in shellfish closures from pollution, changing in market demand, several major storms, and there was a red tide event in 1987. And I'll zoom in on this red box on the next slide. So this is a closer view of landings from 1994 to 2022, shown in gray. And then this also includes the number of participants in the fishery, which is depicted in the black line. And harvest during this time period peaked in 1995 at over 8.7 million clams, and then declines to less than 100,000 clams since 2017. The quick decline in landings is also mirrored by a similar decline in participation over the same time period, with 138 participants in 1996 to less than 10 since 2017. So this figure shows water bodies that account for the majority of the landings from 1994 to 2022 using mechanical gear. Mechanical clam harvest landings have been dominated by two water bodies, the New River, shown in yellow, and Core Sound, shown in gray. The New River has seen a decline in landings in the last 10 years, primarily due to clam kill events, in turn causing fishermen to move to other water bodies or transition to other fisheries. The peak in proportion of landings from the New River in 2020 is an artifact from the extremely low overall mechanical harvest caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. Next, some background on enforcement and maintenance. Each year, the division staff marks all mechanical clam harvest area boundaries with posts and signs to ensure enforceability of these boundaries. Staff replace all missing and damaged posts and signs affected by weather and vandalism. Additionally, a large force of Marine Patrol officers are required to monitor and enforce these areas. In Core Sound, the vast area encompassed by the mechanical clam harvest area, along with its zigzagging boundaries, makes enforcement difficult and resource intensive. The last piece of background I'll go over is the allowance of mechanical harvest permitted prior to maintenance dredging. So through rule, the division allows the mechanical harvest of clams before maintenance dredging in some navigational channels. The purpose of this is to allow commercial fishermen to access the resource that would otherwise be destroyed during maintenance dredging process. This rule has not been utilized since 2007. Reasons that might contribute to this are it's a complicated process and there's limited interest. This process requires collaboration between fishermen, the division, and the Army Corps of Engineers. So now I'll move into this discussion portion of the issue paper. So one of our discussion points is habitat concerns. So research has found that gears with the greatest potential for damage to soft bottom include dredges and trawls. The mechanical gear used to harvest clams are the escalator dredge and clam trawls. Currently, the fishery regulations prohibit the use of mechanical gear on SAV beds and live oyster beds, and is only allowed in designated harvest areas because of the destructive capacity of the gear. These are two maps depicting two mechanical clam harvest areas, the North River on the left and Bogue Sound on the right. From 1981 to 2021, a series of studies were conducted to map SAV beds across the state. The SAV maps generated from these studies were then overlaid onto the mechanical clam harvest area maps to look for areas of SAV overlap. The mechanical clam harvest areas were then adjusted to eliminate overlap and provide a buffer. An example of this overlap and area modification can be seen in the figure on the left, which is the North River, where the red dotted line now shows the new boundary line. And on the right is Bogue Sound, the clam mechanical harvest area. So due to the large extent of overlap, this mechanical clam harvest area has been closed. So another habitat concern is sedimentation. Bottom disturbing gear can have negative impacts on clam beds and oyster reefs directly and indirectly. Directly would be the physical damage, and indirectly would be the resuspension of sediment. High levels of sediment, suspended sediment, can reduce successful sediment of larval clams and oyster, and they can smother shellfish by clogging their gills. So shifting into the socioeconomic analysis, this is a table showing annual economic contributions from the mechanical clam commercial fishery of the last 11 years. So from 2012 to 2022, ex-vessel values have varied from a high of approximately $285,000 in 2012 to a low of approximately $19,000 in 2020. The industry expanded in 2021, but has not returned to pre-2016 landings or participation, which has steadily declined over the period. Each year, the division uses a large amount of staff and resources to monitor, manage, and enforce the fishery. These resources may be difficult to justify for a fishery with such diminished value. State resources may be better used to fund projects more beneficial to the clam fishery as a whole. In the background, we discussed mechanical clam harvest prior to maintenance dredging. If the mechanical clam harvest fishery on public bottom were to be discontinued, it may be necessary to end the exception for mechanical harvest in conjunction with maintenance dredging, as it is currently allowed by rule. This would further benefit the habitat by reducing the extent of turbidity issues associated with mechanical gears. And again, this program has not been utilized since 2007. So now I'll move into the possible management options. So status quo would allow the fishery to continue to operate as it currently does. This would allow for the continuation of a historically significant fishery that provides important supplemental income to some users. The fishermen would currently operating in the fishery could continue and new harvesters could join. State resources for demarcation and enforcement would remain the same, and concerns about effects of bottom disturbing gears on structured habitats would not be addressed. Another option is to further limit the mechanical clam harvest areas to improve enforceability and lessen habitat effects. This could be done by having boundary lines based on permanent structures and more rectangular in shape to also help with line of sight visibility. This was done in the North River, displayed here on the left. Modified boundaries also create buffers around critical habitat to protect them from sedimentation associated with bottom disturbing gears. As with status quo, fishermen currently operating in the fishery could continue and new harvesters could join. State resources for demarcation would be reduced, but the resources required for enforcement would likely remain the same. This could help address habitat concerns, but sedimentation would still occur from mechanical harvesting operations. The next management option would be to phase out the mechanical clam fishery. So due to the requirements of the general statute listed here, the division does not think the mechanical clam harvest fishery can be ended abruptly upon adoption of this amendment. An immediate closure of the fishery could result in the severe curtailment of the usefulness or value of equipment in which fishermen have any sustainable investment, which is outlined in the statute. Also outlined in the statute says that this would require a future effective date as to minimize undue potential economic loss to the fishermen. The mechanical clam harvest fishery could be phased out over a set time frame, as was done with the shellfish relay program. This option would allow fishermen currently operating in the fishery to continue during the phase-out period, but would discourage new participants. The phase-out period would allow current mechanical harvesters time to get rid of their gear or transition out to other methods or fisheries. This option would address the division's resource concerns with demarcation and enforcement, as well as the habitat concerns. Where do I get? Sorry, Jeff. How do I scroll?
Yeah.
Regardless of the phase-out, mechanical gear can still be used in the private sector. So after hearing concerns from the FMP Advisory Committee about participants wanting the ability to re-enter the fishery, the division recommends a phase-out timeline of 3 years from adoption of this amendment unless landing increases to at least 1 million clams and participants increase to at least 10 participants in the fishery in any year prior to 2027. 10 participants have not been active in a single year in the fishery since 2017. In 2022, there were 3 participants. The fishery last landed over 1 million clams in 2014, and in 2022, less than 200,000 clams were landed. This increase in landings and participation would show the fishery is no longer diminishing and is valuable enough to maintain. This is a timeline if both triggers are met in any single year prior to 2027. This timeline would comply with the general statute. If the triggers are met, this issue would be brought back to the MFC for consideration at the May 2027 business meeting or when participation and harvest estimates from 2016 are available. If the triggers are not reached, the phase-out would be complete in May 2028. Fishermen would still have 3 years to sell their gear and transition to other clamming harvesting methods or fisheries. The last management option to be considered is discontinuing the allowance for mechanical clam harvest in conjunction with maintenance dredging. This would end a program that has not been utilized since 2007 and this would require a rule suspension. This option could be pursued on its own or in conjunction with the phase-out of the whole fishery mentioned previously. The division recommends a phase-out to be completed 3 years from the adoption of this plan unless fishery participation and landing triggers discussed previously are met, and to discontinue the allowance for mechanical clam harvest in conjunction with maintenance dredging. These management options would only affect mechanical clam harvest on public bottom. It would not affect their use on private bottom, so mechanical clam harvesting gear can still be used in the private sector. Again, this is just a reminder where we are on the timeline. So the action item today will be to vote on the FMP for Public and Advisory Committee review. And we will take any questions.
Yeah, Tom?
So a couple questions on the mechanical gear phase out. Is that an either or proposition, or is it an and proposition? 1 million pounds and 10 participants, or is it one or the other?
It'd be and.
It'd be both.
Both within a single year.
Have we ever had a year with 10 people harvest more than 1 million clams?
Yep, 2014 was the last time. It's important to note that these aren't really unreasonable expansion numbers. If you look at something like the mid to late 1990s, we were harvesting 5 to 10 times that many clams, and there was 5 to 10 times as many participants, depending on what year you look at.
So compared to other bottom trawl gear, clam dredging is a particularly impactful destructive gear. And the sediment plumes from them are pretty extensive from my experience. I guess what I don't like is the incentivizing of a phase out. I think you either phase it out or you don't, right? And that's kind of where I'm at. You're actually incentivizing people to come back into this fishery, and we hear repeatedly all the time about the limitations of staff resources and the limitations of law enforcement resources and how hard we are to do anything. So I guess my only thing is if we're going to phase it out, I think you just phase it out. I mean, whether it's 3 years or 5 years, I guess my question would be, would it be feasible to do a phase out with a smaller area allowance in that period of a phase out? Does that make sense? Like you talk about reducing the areas of which it's allowed. Could you do?
Yeah, and just to put a little context as to why there's those triggers put in place, during the AC workshop, we originally presented a phase out that would not have any sort of triggers attached for reexamination. Also, those triggers, maybe it wasn't completely clear in the presentation, but they wouldn't automatically allow for the continuation of this gear. It would just come back to the commission to be reevaluated. If y'all still felt like it was an inappropriate gear, you could continue the phase out and end the fishery. It would just allow for a second look at it. And that's what we heard from the harvesters during the AC workshop. They said that this is a culturally significant gear that's usually passed down through generations. It's a very expensive gear. It's hard to get into. There's a steep cost of entry, and it's important to these families. And they said they have some kids going off to college and some younger generations that have shown interest in joining the fishery. And there's also a significant, or not significant portion, but there's at least a few people that are retired that rely on this as a supplemental source of income. So that's just to provide some background as to how we came up with adding these.
Jeff, that is really important context. I really appreciate you providing that from the start to finish. And I'll definitely take that into consideration. Thank you.
And one thing, Doug, before I go to you, one of the biggest problems with the hard clam dredging is that development and bottom closure. I mean, they used to be very prevalent at Topsail. They would open up sections of the waterway all the time. And when they did that in the 2010 to probably 2018 or 2016, somewhere in there, I mean, there was a lot of them there. Sometimes there'd be 15 or 20 of them right there in the waterway. And with all the development and all the runoff, those areas are now closed. So, as expensive as it is, I've worked on one of them before, and as expensive as it is to operate them, I mean, when you start running out of bottom, you just had to quit using it. Most of the guys sold their gear to people with private leases, so they could use it in their private leases, because they just couldn't afford to do it on public bottom no more, because there wasn't any left, you know. Now, that's just down south, I don't know from there. And then I think Doug wanted to.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I just wanted to remind the commission, and for that matter, the staff, on behalf of Commissioner Gardner and myself and the Habitat and Water Quality Standing Advisory Committee, that we are looking pretty aggressively in the aftermath of our decision not to go forward with the shrimp and inshore closures is to protect SAB, to look at all of the other fishing and non-fishing threats in those waters, not just to standing SAB beds, but to what we have all agreed to continue to call SAB habitat, which means all of those waters shallow enough with the right sedimentary substrates and energetic conditions to support SAB as core habitats for all of our marine and estuarine resources here in North Carolina, to identify all of those direct threats that could be mitigated. And I just observed, therefore, that the mapping exercise that you saw understates the overlap between bottom disturbing gears and that habitat that we're trying not just to protect, because it's way less than 20%, probably less than 10% of what we need to maintain the rest of our resources. We're trying to bring it back and build it back, and it does have the power to do that, sometimes with the right assistance, but also with the right interventions. And so I think we're going to find that all of the areas of the type where this fishery is operated, and certainly in depths less than 3 meters or so, are going to turn out not to be suitable because of the direct or potential future interference with restoring SAB as a core goal of the state, of this commission, and of the 3 commissions that together adopt the Coastal Habitat Protection Plan, which is coming up for review. So I guess I'm speaking in support of protecting that, and that means, in my view, of phase out is appropriate, and if there is enough interest for it to be continued, then that would have to be matched up to appropriate places that are not directly already identified as SAB habitat, irrespective of whether there are present SAB beds there today, because they come and go. And so, yeah, I think I would want to be very careful not to develop an expectation that we might continue that fishery now and then in a year or so find that it's in unavoidable and unacceptable direct conflict with SAB habitat. So in that sense, for me, that's a clear caveat we need to put on that draft when it goes out for review, that I would have said that no active, I mean, we're asking the small mom and pop shrimpers to stay away from these same areas and to constrain their bottom disturbing into those areas that are away from SAB habitat. And I think we ought to do the same here. And it would be totally unfair, as Commissioner Roller suggested, to give them false hope or a false expectation or to incentivize the continuation of a fishery that's going to turn out to be against the best interests of the people of North Carolina. So again, I'm not intending that as a blanket criticism of the fishery. I just would want to make sure that the depths were appropriate to be matched up to the user group without inducing, and perpetuating a direct threat to SAB habitat. Did I overstate that, Sarah, or do you want to?
So my comment to that is that, it used to be, and speaking of where I live and pretty much where Mike lives, back before there was beach renourishment, we had a lot of water that was over 3 meters deep. But over the years, beach renourishment, anybody that took marine biology in school knows that, the beach is supposed to be a living thing, and the sand comes off the front and moves to the back. And of course, now with bulkheads and terminal goings and all that stuff, it just goes into the back, and it can't go to the back of the beach no more, so it fills in the estuaries, which, in my area where you used to take a 30-foot boat through places to crab, now I'm on a 20-foot boat with a tunnel in it with a jet motor to even be able to go through there. So, you know, pretty much, except for the Intercoastal Waterway, from the South Carolina line to Cape Fear, let's say the Cape Fear River, New River, and Intercoastal Waterway, there's not anywhere in my area all the way up to New River that has 3 meters of water. So, you know, from that perspective, that would mean everything would be closed to everything, you know, because I did the study for the division on bottom disturbing gear, you know, and the biggest bottom disturbing gear that we came up with of everything we did was a prop on outboard motor. And so, you know, it depends on how far you want to go with this SAV thing, you know, because before long you're going to say, well, Tom can't go in there and fish because his outboard motor is the worst bottom disturbing gear we got, so you got to stay out of there. And that's, you know, and I'm going out on a far side just like you did, but, you know, yeah, and I think the clam thing is going to go away on its own. I don't think it's profitable anymore with what it costs to keep the gear going. But every time we start talking about protecting SAV for everything, every time we close something else because of SAV, because I battle with UNCW all the time because of where my crab pots are, and they'll call the division, Garland Ops right back there right now, they'll call them and go, that guy needs a ticket, because when he rides through there, there's dead pieces of eelgrass floating, you know. And so I guess, you know, my point is I don't want to see us take all of the bottom from everybody that's trying to make a living, whether it's a charter boat guy or a commercial guy, to save grass that was never ever where I was until the last 8 years, because the water finally got shallow enough with all the beach tree nourishment and the sediment moving back in that it grows there now, you know. So if you go down that road of we're going to keep putting people out because of SAV grass, you know, before it's over with, you're going to do what a lot of people want and just eliminate all the commercial fisheries. And so, yes, sir.
Just a point of clarification. The division already has the authority to restrict these areas to prevent direct SAV damage. We've done so. That was the example in North River. We saw some overlap based on the APNEP mosaic that was created. So we adjusted those lines. So we're not so much in this plan, in this phase out, worried about direct disturbance of seagrass. It's more that sedimentation issue that would be addressed here. We already have the authority to adjust it, and we have if there's overlap, because obviously we don't want these gears on top of SAV beds, and that's been a concern for many years.
All right. Yes, you can.
And I wasn't trying to prejudge the close everything to everything, because to be clear, if we were going to go down that route, that would require a lot of non-fishing related interventions that are not likely to be complete in that sense coming out of the Environmental Management Commission, Coastal Resources Commission, everybody else in the known world. What I meant was we have a process underway that we agreed to in finalizing our action on the shrimp plan to look at all of the threats to SAV habitat and frankly to under the chipped oyster reefs and oyster habitat and the rest of them that support these things in a systematic way, and to look at how those various threats can and or might not need to be mitigated. And so that process is in front of us. It's at the Habitat and Water Quality Standing Advisory Committee right now for initial discussions with the staff, and it'll be coming back over years to come back to the commission. I just didn't want to prejudge that outcome in terms of a particular gear here, given that is pending, is my point.
Go ahead, A.
First, you have to excuse my ignorance. I have very limited knowledge on the clamming industry, but by reading the documents, I made some observations and just had some questions. So the way that I read everything, in 1996, there's 132 participants. Today, there's 3. So to Sammy's point, it's naturally phased out on its own for various reasons. But then I also read the concern from the advisory committee is participant reentry. And then the division has put a maximum threshold of 10. my assumption would be that there's always going to be a few people left in the industry until there's final closure. So I just don't understand why there's a phase out when you want to close something. You know, there's always going to be a few people left at the end. Why not just go ahead and make the closure now? Those are just my observations and questions for that reasoning.
Yeah, and I can address both of those. So the phase-out period, the reason we can't end immediately is that general statute that was referenced earlier says if there's a severe curtailment to a gear that fishermen have a substantial investment in, then there needs to be a future effective date of the closure for that gear to allow them time to either sell that gear or use that gear in another capacity, which in this case would be for private culture. This gear would still be allowed on private leases. It would just be taken off of the public bottom. To address the expansion of it, like I said before, we're not saying that we would automatically keep this open if it reached those expansion numbers, but the participants in this gear expressed that if it did show that it was a financially viable fishery again, they would like it to at least be considered some option for them to allow this culturally significant gear to continue.
And it'll be good to, you know, go out to the regional advisory committees, and then when it comes back to us, we'll have a lot more information from a lot more people that'll help everything. Yeah, Mike?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just out of curiosity, and there was, how much bottom is private, and how many dredges operate on that private bottom? As far as clam, mechanical harvest, whatever this is. And just for the record, I'm not well versed in any clamming, and so I'm learning just like y'all are.
So that's a better question for Zach, but based on our conversations, it's pretty limited, folks that are using this to harvest off the bottom. I believe it's 3, is that right, Zach? Around there, okay.
Sorry, real quick. So we can get a mechanical methods permit for leases that are in mechanically prohibited areas, where we review that particular lease. At most, there's been about 4, and a lot of those were in New River with people who were mechanical clammers, and then my guess is they found it to be more efficient with the leases they had to clam in their particular lease. I don't have specific numbers on people using it in a clam or a mechanical methods area because they don't need that additional permit. But within the prohibited area, we have usually 4, maybe 5.
And just a little bit more background on that. So in terms of getting rid of this gear or transitioning, this gear is actually still used in the Northeast. So there's still value to the gear. It's not like if we got rid of this fishery, these people would be left high and dry with an expensive gear that they could do nothing with. It's still resellable, and it could also be used on private bottom.
Go ahead, sir.
My question would be, could this concern be addressed with just adding a sentence to the possibility if there is that slight resurgence that would allow a revisit of this process, is just to say to allow this to continue within the restricted, what the SAV mosaic would allow at the time of revisiting this industry. Does that make sense? Just
Yeah, and
simple.
we actually don't need to state that because we already have the authority to reduce these areas if there's overlap with SAV, and we have actively done that. We've closed the Bogue Sound area, we've significantly reduced the Core Sound area, we've reduced the North River area, and we've slightly reduced the New River area based on direct SAV overlap concerns. And we made sure to build in a buffer, an acceptable buffer for that. So that's a great point, but I don't think that it needs clarification because we have already utilized that authority.
Yes, sir.
One last quick question, just to educate me and maybe a couple other newer commissioners. What is a typical phase-out time period? I mean, is 3 years kind of typical for a phase out, or, I mean, and what are those parameter? I mean, I guess bookends, like 1 year to 5 year. I'm just trying to understand a little bit better.
So the most direct example would be the shellfish relay phase-out, which was a 2-year period. The fishery wanted a much longer phase-out period, but we felt that this was a good middle ground to both address their concerns, but also you don't want to have a protracted phase-out period, as you've brought up.
Go ahead, Ryan.
Hey. Just a couple questions. One thing was, you said it clogs the gills of clams or maybe other bivalvia. Can you talk about like how the biology of that works?
In terms of turbidity causing that?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, just heavy sedimentation. You know, clams are filter feeders, and they do have some ability to feed on particular particles and filter it out. But when you get to a certain sedimentation load, they have to breathe. They can only close up for so long. So you can smother them with too much sedimentation. It can also affect their feeding. They're not able to effectively filter the food particles away from the sediment when you get to a certain sediment load.
Right. And does the dredging cause enough for that to happen? Because it seems like weather and other things like that cause a lot more turbidity.
So localized, absolutely. If you look at an escalator dredge, something like that, you're shooting. It's different than other, like a shrimp trawl. You know, you're just trying to get shrimp that are already sitting on top of it. You need to penetrate the sediment several inches to extract these clams, and especially something like an escalator dredge where you're shooting jets of water into the bottom. It creates significant disturbance in those areas. There is some, you know, there's a diffusion of that sediment over a distance. I'm not sure what the magic radius of that is, but it definitely has enough of an effect in that specific area to affect the clams.
And so the clam dredging, you're saying, is killing the clams also?
Well, by design, but it could cause unintended mortality in terms of significant sedimentation.
Great.
Once again, I'm gonna offer somebody to get on my boat. I've got about 500,000 clams under mats right now. And as the sediment moves in off the back of the beach into the leases, I mean, when the sediment starts encroaching, my mats have got lead core around them, so they're easy to pick up. I don't use rebar like a lot of other people because it's like a bed sheet when you put, you know, hang lead core into it. And when you go there and the sediment has been encroaching and you've, say, been crabbing too hard or mullet fishing too hard, what you've been doing, and you went 6 months without moving it, every clam, if there's 5,000 clams under that one mat, every clam in there has moved to the center of the mat, and they've pushed it up so that they can all breathe. So it's hard for me to imagine that a clam that's in open bottom could be buried unless it was a hurricane or something that pushed in like it did to one end of my lease, where it put 2 feet of dirt on it, and it couldn't be done because clams move. You know, I don't know how many people in here realize that, but clams move a lot. And you can sit there and watch in my lease and see that somebody dredging is not going to put enough sediment there to make a clam suffer or suffocate. I've been doing it a long time. All right, go ahead, Mike.
Okay, so unrelated to mechanical harvest of clams, this is just maybe a periphery item, and it's just a question at the moment, but it's been observed by fishermen the amount of clams that a blue catfish take in at certain times. And so there's no mention of that concern in this draft. And at times, those catfish eat a considerable amount of clams during specific periods of the year where other food sources just maybe not are as prevalent or available. Is that a concern that we need to address here, or is that something the division has investigated at all? Because those clam beds up in the Albemarle Sound are all closed. There's no harvest up there. However, like species like blue crab, you know, they congregate on top of those clam beds, and they tend to eat those clams at times as well. And so that's been a concern, you know, because that's a habitat item. I think, you know, clams are part of the habitat. They're filter feeders. They help the water, all that. And, you know, the amount of clams that are ingested by these catfish is probably a lot. And so that's just a question I had in reference to clams.
Yeah, and I think that's something that could be appropriate to add to the base plan, to the threats, the environmental threats. We could add a predation section in there. In terms of the division's concern over that, we're not concerned with population abundance of clams right now. Overfishing's obviously not occurring because it's such a diminished fishery. So this amendment is pretty much focused on habitat concerns and the economic resources for the division to monitor and enforce this fishery. And then the other portion of this plan would be that recreational harvest that Oyster had presented yesterday. I think invasive predation is a concern with any species, and I think it would be appropriate to maybe include a mention of that in the base plan, but I don't think it's a population concern for the division currently.
So why don't we go ahead and push this thing through and get some information from everybody else? Go ahead, Ryan.
Yeah, just another question too. What is like comparing it to the dredging that's happening on private bottom? Like what's the damage for the guys that are doing it in public in terms of the turbidity versus the guys doing it on private land or bottom?
So I don't know that I can make the comparison there.
Is it same gear type?
Yeah, it would be the same gear. Yep. So the main difference would be that those bottoms have already been checked before the lease was permitted to show that there wasn't any shellfish already growing in there. So there's not any SAV on the lease. So hopefully in that area, you're not affecting anything else growing on the bottom. The public bottom area is, you know, it's by definition productive. It's producing clams on its own. There's probably other sessile organisms in there, sponges and oysters and other things that are being affected by the turbidity. So hopefully by the lease having already been inspected and permitted in the way that it is, and obviously if people want to use mechanical methods, they need to consult with the H&E section, and that permit would be reviewed beforehand. So hopefully that oversight would prevent the negative side effects of the dredging, but that's not to say there would obviously still be some turbidity issues with that.
Right, because the plume isn't going to stay on the private bottom. It's going to move.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Can I make a motion to do as the division has recommended and send this draft as it stands for public and advisory committee review?
All right, so we got a motion and a second, and I think we've had plenty of discussion. So we'll let Jesse make a roll call vote.
Commissioner Bethea?
Aye.
Commissioner Blanton?
Aye.
Commissioner Claus?
Aye.
Commissioner Gardner?
Aye.
Commissioner Hopgood?
Aye.
Commissioner Rader?
Aye.
Commissioner Roller?
Aye.
Commissioner Service?
Aye.
And Chairman Corbett.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, now we're going to go to Barbie Bird.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone. That's better. So thank you for your time this morning. We were supposed to chat yesterday, but with the change of the agenda, I'm talking with you this morning. And I am here to give you a brief update about the new Section 10 incidental take permit, and also an update on the observer trip scheduling system. So there is more information in your briefing materials. This is really just a brief update. And also in your briefing materials is a link to the new ITP for further reading on your part if you like. So the National Fisheries Service issued the new ITP on the 2nd of October, and this new permit is valid through August 31st of 2034. So this ITP covers both sea turtles and sturgeon rather than having two separate ITPs like we have in the past. For this new ITP, we also worked with National Fisheries Service to clarify some definitions of the gillnet activities that are exempt from the ITP and all of the related requirements for those. So one of the things that you would notice about the new ITP when you look at it is that the updated numbers of takes that are authorized and the covered fisheries are quite a bit lower. This is due in part to a couple of things. First of all, there was a lower number of predicted takes that was included in the permit application. And then this was based largely on the reduction in fishing effort due to the Southern Flounder FMP's amendments. So the final takes were also influenced by what NIMS would authorize through their internal Section 7 consultation. So the previous ITPs set authorized takes that were specific for a management unit. And in conversations with NIMS, we discussed that this really has no biological basis. And so one of the things that we did is we asked for the authorized takes to be statewide. So for example, sea turtles that occur in Core Sound are from the same, for a particular species, are the same stock as sea turtles that would occur in, the New River. So this statewide take approach does offer greater flexibility for the division to use adaptive management to maintain takes below these authorized levels. So this table shows the authorized takes for the common species. And another change in this permit you'll see is that the authorized numbers are in 2-year rolling totals. This 2-year rolling total, the division would still use an annual take target, which is half of that total, to maintain takes below that authorized by the ITP. But this means that if takes unexpectedly exceeded the annual take target, that the number would just be borrowed from the following year rather than going out of compliance. And you'll see, like in the previous ITPs, some authorized takes are based on the number that's predicted across the entire fishery. So for example, here, observed takes for live Atlantic sturgeon are extrapolated across the fishery. And for these instances, there were enough data to predict takes across the fishery for the application that was developed. In other instances, the authorized takes are based on a count of observed takes. And this just has to do with the amount of data that were available for predicting takes across the fishery. And if you're really interested in that, I'd be happy to talk to you, or you could read the ITP application for more information. The new ITP also sets authorized take levels for rare species across the 10-year permit itself. So short-nosed sturgeon are rare in North Carolina. We have had 2 observed interactions in 2016. So we asked for them to be included in this permit. Hawksbill sea turtles, as many of you may know, are a more tropical species with rare occurrence in North Carolina. Leatherback sea turtles are seasonally abundant in ocean waters, but are unlikely to occur in estuarine waters. And so even though these takes are likely not to occur or rarely to occur, we felt it was important to make sure they were included so that any unusual take would be authorized by the permit. So as required, the new ITP conservation plan includes measures to monitor, to avoid and minimize, and then also to mitigate takes. And I'm going to walk you through some highlights for each of these. This slide may be familiar to some of you. So similar to the past ITPs, the monitoring component includes requirements for observer coverage by mesh size category for each of the management units in each season. And this is to ensure that coverage is representative across the fishery in both time and space. The observer coverage requirements are greater for large mesh gill nets than small mesh gill nets, which is similar to the previous permits. And the estuarine gill net permit will remain a necessary tool to ensure that the division meets the ITP requirements. And one of those ITP requirements is the implementation of the Observer Trip Scheduling System, or OTSS, and I'll be reviewing some updates about that at the end of this presentation. So the ITP also revised the boundary between management units B and D1 in Core Sound. And the boundary in Core Sound was just moved north such that the entire Core Sound was in one management unit. Now D1 has this northern and southern subunit. The ITP maintains the closure of that southern subunit that's required for gill nets that are 4 inches or greater between May and October. And this change really doesn't affect fishing activity. It's just a housekeeping thing on our part when we use trip ticket data for Core Sound to calculate observer coverage. The other boundary change was to include all of Turnagain Bay in Management Unit C. So previously the boundary line split this bay between Management Units B and C, and that's because we drew a straight line. And so this change really doesn't affect fishing activity. It just tries to kind of capture the change in the coastline. Oops, hold on. So strategies in the new ITP to avoid and minimize instilled takes are largely the same as the previous ITPs. So they include focused regulations for gill nets targeting flounder and the continuation of the standard attendance requirements for small mesh gill nets. An added regulation is to extend the overnight soak time restrictions for the flounder gill net fishery to management units A and C, and these restrictions are already in place in the Southern Flounder FMP amendment. And finally, like in the last ITP, there are continued requirements for fishermen to report unobserved takes covered by the ITP and to follow safe handling practices. So as required, the ITP conservation plan also includes measures to mitigate or offset takes that do occur under the ITP, and they include items, some of which the division has been doing this whole time. And one of those is we provide data to National Marine Fisheries Service and other researchers on sea turtles and sturgeon that are observed, and we provide also data on acoustic telemetry array that we maintain. So for other researchers that are putting acoustic tags on sturgeon, for example, those data become available for them to look at movements of those tagged fish, and we provide those data and maintain those arrays. And additionally, we help when possible for those cold stunning events of sea turtles that occur. So we can help with the transportation of those sea turtles. This ITP conservation plan also includes new measures that were not in the last ITPs or not things that we had done in the past. And one of those is the requirement for the division to purchase pit tags that are applied to observed Atlantic sturgeon takes. The ITP also outlines Another mitigation measure of funding genetic testing of fin clips that are collected from observed sturgeon takes. And then the division is also going to be providing some funding to the North Carolina Aquarium for sea turtle rehab. So this is relevant because observed sea turtle takes, if they are injured or debilitated based on their interaction, then those turtles are taken in for veterinary care.
Yeah, go ahead, Mike.
Just a really quick question on that last slide.
Yeah.
Where are the funds coming from to fund all of that?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I should have mentioned that. They come from the Commercial Fishing Resource Fund.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, but, so when did it become the responsibility of the fishermen to do genetic testing, put tags on fish, fund the aquarium? I'm sorry, I'm at a loss here because this is new to me. And it's a little upsetting.
So,
And
do you
I'm not
remember?
sure how it's authorized to take money from the fishermen that's in a fund for an observer program and to disperse it in such a way. Where is the law, what law allows that?
So, these things were specifically requested from National Marine Fisheries Service, and the ITP requires, part of the ITP process requires this mitigation or offsetting, meaning that, so the permit authorizes a certain number of takes, and we are required to include measures to offset those takes, meaning that we are required to come up with methods that would help other animals that weren't taken to survive. And does that make sense?
I'm sorry. I'm gonna get on my soapbox for just 1 minute here. There are more turtles and sturgeons out there than you can shake a stick at. I have seen more turtles in the Albemarle Sound than I ever seen in my entire life, and I've seen more sturgeons jump and slam out of the water by I don't know how many. I have more crab pots tore up, eaten, coral rings ripped out, absolutely destroyed by sea turtles. And you're telling me that I have to soak up that expense in my operation and then take my money, the fisherman's money, the commercial fisherman's money, and tag these things, genetically test them, and I don't get any compensation back whatsoever for my gear and the amount of time it takes me to fix it, build it, purchase it, and put it all back together when they tear it up. This is not fair. I don't care how you look at it. The funding source for that stuff should not be used for what it's been used for. That's not fair. The funding source should be used for the daggone crabbers to get their crab pots replaced, is what it should be. Because we didn't ask for our crab pots to be tore up, and we ain't bothered a single sea turtle or sturgeon with them. So far as the daggone gillnet fishery, it's gone. We fished 3 or 4 days. And I say we as a community, because we didn't get a chance, that's all we get. So you're telling me that we're going to take a bunch of money out of that fund because those tags ain't cheap and the genetic testing is not cheap probably, and then to fund the aquarium's sea turtle rehabilitation program when the majority of that is from cold stuns? That's not fair. I don't care which way you look at it. That is not fair. And so I encourage, and I don't know how to fix it, if it can be fixed or where another funding source can be found from, But the funding source y'all are using is not a fair way to equitably distribute those funds in a way that's proper. Because we, as a fisherman, as an industry, has done all we can do to help these animals out. I promise you we have. Because we leave them alone because they're nothing but a nuisance to us. And every time we interact with them, we get another scar on our backs. So to think, and for this to come out in such a way in a PowerPoint presentation to the industry, this was not told to us. And so how is it that a process can go so far forward and the industry not know a thing about what their money is going to right now?
Okay, Kat.
So I just want to reference the statute here, and it says, first, the fund shall fully fund the state's incidental take permits for the commercial fishing industry under the Endangered Species Act. And Barbie talked about the mitigation of this. Nothing would tickle me any more than for the commercial fishermen to take over the ITP program. So yes, these things might seem out of bounds to you, Mike, but they are, as Barbie pointed out, they are mitigation items that are covered under this. You may not like it, but I think this spending is appropriate, and it is, again, part of the mitigation of this permit. And I understand the issue regarding sea turtles and the amount of sea turtles. I totally understand that, but that, you know just as good as anybody that that is not the arena that we are playing in. What we are trying to do is continue to be in compliance with the mandates of the ESA and this incidental take permit. That is what the division is trying to do. And I will further say that this division has bent over backwards to do that. And I don't want this conversation to go off the rails here, but I can tell you I don't have an appetite for this because the work that this division has done for this ITP and for this gillnet fishery, I just can't even tell you the amount of time and resources that we spend trying to keep this tool in the toolbox of the fishermen. And so to me, this is not something that should disrupt the entire apple cart relative to the spending on this.
And I'm gonna say one thing before you, Mike. I mean, as being one of the people that met with Gene Beasley and got this whole thing started, and I apologize for that, but I was there. It has to be done. Do I like that the money's taken from there to do it? No. But in Kat's defense, they have done everything, and Barbie also, that they can do to keep the gillnet fishery alive, whether it's small mesh or large mesh. And I see Mike's point also, but I'm gonna, say that, Kat, y'all have done a wonderful job of keeping that fishery open, and then I'm gonna let Mike go ahead. Go ahead, Mike.
This is not a dig at the division's work to keep the gillnet fishery open. This is a dig at using funds that should not be used for situations that we have nothing or no control over. I'm going to make this last comment, and I'm just going to get right off of my soapbox because this stuff works me up, gets my blood pressure up, and I don't need that. But you take a poll of the entire commercial fishing industry, not just Mike Blanton sitting here at this table trying to represent that, of what them funds are properly supposed to be used for, and in there, one of them would agree to do any of that.
All right, let's move forward. Go ahead, Barbie.
Okay, well, I have more bad news. So even with the changes that have been made to help us stay in compliance, the lower authorized levels are already affecting gillnet fishery. So I've highlighted here a row for authorized takes of dead green sea turtles. And as you can see, the authorized takes are predicted across the fishery for both large and small mesh categories of gillnets. So between October 2nd and October 18th, there were 6 observed dead green sea turtle takes. And those takes extrapolated to 76.5 green sea turtles across the fisheries. So if you compare that to the annual take target of 85, then one more observed take would extrapolate to more than the annual take target. So that would mean that the authorized takes would have to be borrowed from the second year of the 2-year rolling takes. So as a result of that, there was a proclamation that was issued on October 27th, and this proclamation closed all of Management Unit D1 to ITP-covered gill nets because of the overlaps of sea turtles and the fishing activity there. And the proclamation also required net attendance in other management units where sea turtles commonly occur, so not in Management Units A and C. As the water temperatures decrease and sea turtles become less common, the division, of course, would consider removing these restrictions, but they're in place now. So it's already starting to affect gillnet fishing.
And can I say one thing?
Yeah.
And you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think I am. And that's in the set net fishery for small mesh.
Correct.
And that would not include the runaround fishery or the drop net fishery or the drift net fish, I think. So
Correct.
those three are exempt because they don't have turtle interaction, so those three are exempt from that. It's just a set net fishery.
Correct.
All right, thank you.
So I'm going to pause a moment before talking about the observer trip scheduling system just to see if there are any more questions about the ITP. I mean, certainly the application and the permit are available and have a lot more information in there, but are there any clarifying questions at this time?
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Chairman, I just want to make one more comment about, I don't want to get this, I want to get back, and I don't want to get your blood pressure up, Mike. But I did want to make a more of a comment about those requirements that Barbie talked about and the potential for those to provide good information, because that is the part that is the good part of this. The pit tagging, the genetic studying, I think all of those are important for us to have and for us to provide to NIMS, for further understanding about the populations that are found in North Carolina. And I think, just to clarify, and Barbie, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but the aquarium rehabilitation is for turtles that were captured in gear mostly? Is that what that is for, or is that broader than that?
It's almost that. So the ITP application actually kind of laid out the amount of monies that would be for these sorts of things. But the amount of money that is going to be transferred to the aquarium is based on an average of the number of sea turtles that have been taken in from observed interactions. So, in one year, we might take a few more than the other year, so it's kind of averaged out, but based on the number of takes that have been have occurred over the past 10 years or more, and that have been taken in for care. So it's not to fund, I think to your point, it's not to fund all of the turtles that are taken in for cold stuns or anything else. It's based on an average.
Go ahead, Tom.
Thank you, Barbie. I've got some more comments. I'll reserve them to the end, but I guess my question is not to beat this bush too hard, is my familiarity with the ITP process. Is the other ones that have been issued, for example, the Georgia sturgeon shad fishery, or the Georgia shad fishery for sturgeon, the biggest mitigation aspect of these is to provide scientific data, is it not? And that's basically a parameter of just about any ITP. Am I correct in saying that?
Any ITP should have mitigation measures.
And a lot of that is scientific data collection, which, like, if you look at Georgia, that's basically what they do, is they provide a lot of information in the shad fishery, or in the sturgeon that they catch in the shad fishery, correct? So.
I'd have to reread to remember their mitigation measures, but that sounds reasonable.
Well, that's good with that. Take us on to that wonderful program I got to help with. That it's got to be pretty good. Even old dumb crabber like me could figure out how to call it in. So.
Well, thank you for that. And just one more comment I would say is the mitigation measures. This is something that in conversations with NIMS, they pushed really hard on. I mean, they basically said to us, we cannot approve your ITP without more mitigation measures than you've provided in the past. So that's an important point. Okay, let's talk about the observer trip scheduling system. So this is a requirement of the new ITP, and I have been talking to y'all about this, the folks that are around this table that have been here since before December of 2022. And the need for this OTIS is really born out of the fact that the division hasn't always been able to meet the observer coverage requirements of the ITP because observers have struggled to schedule and find trips. So the division has been testing the system for over a year, and we've worked out a lot of the technical issues. This past September, we had 8 industry members, including Chairman Corbett, help us test the system and provide feedback not only on how the system worked, but also some of the outreach materials that we provided. And so we're on track to start the training meetings next January, and I'll put those dates up here in a moment, with an expected launch date for mid-February. The observers have had a table during this meeting, and we would like to continue to have that for commercial fishermen to be able to go up and use the online tool and call in and just see how it works. So when the system launches, fishermen are going to need to report their fishing activity for the upcoming week by either calling in or using an online portal. So the system will open up at Monday at 12 a.m. and it's going to close on Wednesday night at 11:59 p.m. And during this open period, fishermen will call to report planned activity starting the following Monday. When the fishermen report, they'll enter their primary management unit where they think they're going to fish, whether they plan to fish small mash or large mash gill nets or both perhaps, and also whether they plan to fish anytime during the 3-week portion. So we've divided the week into Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday through Sunday. On Thursday, fishermen who called in will be notified of their selection status for each week portion, and they'll be notified by email, call, or text, or all 3. And if they're selected, they'll be assigned an observer and given that observer's phone number, and if they're not selected, they'll be given a confirmation number. On Friday, the fishermen who are selected will get another notification by email, phone call, or text to remind them to contact their observer. And this contact is really important, just this initial contact, so that observers can plan for their travel, should they need to travel far the following Sunday, right, to be ready for Monday. So once OTIS launches, it will be unlawful for fishermen to set gill nets covered by the ITP without either an observer on board or a confirmation number. But we do understand that plans change based on things like weather and fish price and engine issues. So if selected fishermen end up not fishing, they just need to contact their observer and let them know. There may also be occasions when an observer has to cancel, and if this happens, the observer program will coordinate with Marine Patrol such that fishermen can legally fish without that confirmation number. So before the launch in February, we're going to be mailing out information to all the EGMP holders, including instructions on how to use the system. And then we already have scheduled 6 trainings so that we can go over the details of the system in detail. That was redundant, wasn't it? If you have any questions, you can email the observer program at the address shown here. And, obviously I'm still here to answer some of the questions that you may have.
Yes, sir, Tom.
Thank you, Chairman. So, quick comment. I don't want to beat the funding thing to the bush. I just want to point out, because I always point this out when we talk about this, is all commercial fishermen pay for this program.
Say that last part.
All commercial fishermen pay for this program. If you are a grouper snapper fisherman and you have a scuffle to land fish, you're paying for this program. Half of those funds go into this program. I just think it's important to point that out, that it's not just the gill netters who are funding the incidental take program, the observer program. So my question is this year, how many days was large mesh open?
4.
So it was
4.
open 4 days. Were the observers in the program able to cover all of those trips to get the 7 or 10% coverage?
We were very short-staffed this last flounder season. You know, y'all have heard that that's a problem for the division, and so we had help from other fisheries management staff and Marine Patrol for flounder
So you
season.
had, so to do the observing, you had people from across the division helping with the observer program for large mesh.
Yes.
And I just point that out because the division has done so much to keep this fishery open. I mean, they really have bent over backwards for the last 20 years. So I'm just pointing that out, how much that goes into this program, how many resources are used to keep this fishery open, even if it's only 4 days.
And the only thing I'd have to say is that I want to remind everybody that this is only the set net fishery, you know, because there's a lot of people that are coming up to me seeing as I participated in it and like, so before I go mullet fishing, I've got to, and I'm like, no, that's a runaround net. It's not a set net. It's a set net fishery thing. So, yes, sir, Mike.
All right, so I've gathered a few more thoughts, and so Tom Roller, it's got a great point when he says that there are other fishermen that have never set a gill net funding this project. That's not fair. That's not fair. There are guys out there that have never set a gill net that their funds are going to a program that's not benefiting them. That's a great point. I'll tell you right now, I ain't set a piece of gill net and left it in years. So even myself, as testimony, I'm funding something that is not benefiting me. And so if you can't see how this is unfair to use these funds to fund things that are not benefiting the entirety of the industry, that's not fair. It's not fair for the federal government to come down and make mandatory, I don't even know what to call it. It's all become a mess, in my opinion. And it's not fair to those that are having to do more and get less. And I understand this is not a dig at this is all just about the fund. This is not about the work the division has done, the effort the division has done to do all of this. It has nothing, my comments had nothing to do with that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
And then I'll say, you know, that this is a federal government thing. Cat, Barbie, they're in the middle of something that they have to figure out how to make work so that other fishermen, you know, that do use the process, that they can get the money. I mean, it's a tough deal. It's been a tough deal since the first day, and I mean, so it's got to come from somewhere. And the federal government's not going to give us the money to implement their rules. We have to come up with it ourselves. And like Mike said, it's, you know, no dig at you guys. Y'all do a wonderful job. And, you know, we can be mad with the federal government. We shouldn't be mad with the division. Go ahead, Kat.
And just real quick, to remind the commission that this fund was, my understanding, and staff can correct me if I'm wrong, but this fund was set up, you know, kind of with the fishermen agreeing that this is how they wanted to go about this. So if that's not fair to the fishermen, they're the ones that set up this fund. Now, obviously, that was probably by, you know, they felt like this was forced because of the ESA, but we all know that there's not a whole lot of wiggle room in the ESA.
Yeah, Tom.
So, Mike, I've always said how much I enjoy debating with you, and we're usually on the opposite sides of the fence, but in this meeting, we're agreeing on a lot of things. And I'm impressed too. But what I want to bring up is how much I agree with you in your comments, because it is an argument I've been making for probably the last 15 years, is that I don't think other fishermen should be paying for this program. If the large mesh fishery, or even the small mesh fishery, can't pay its own bills, then we have to ask another question.
Yes, sir.
I'm sorry, one last comment. I did not mean to create all this today. Apologetic for that, but I feel like.
Just remember, I got to go oystering this afternoon, so.
I promise, this is my last one. And
Yeah,
so,
okay.
I'll refrain.
All right, thank you, Barbie.
You're welcome.
Hey, it's going to come back to us again. Just
This was gonna be my
just take-
comment.
just take
This
a
was
breath
gonna be
now
my
and get your
comment.
blood pressure right,
You know,
and then the next
this
time
was
you
gonna
go
be my
ahead.
comment, really, because
Okay.
when this ITP stuff started and this observer program started, the fishery was operating 11 months out of the year. And so what I'm trying to get at here is it's been reduced by regulation through different FMPs that the state has built and created and established down to 4 days. We can't leave shad nets anymore. We can't leave flounder nets anymore. It's just a couple of days. So we've gone from 11 months of trying to fund a program for 11 months a year to 4. And now it's costing us more to fish 4 days. And this was my overall point the whole time. It's costing us more to fish for 4 days than it ever has in the entirety of the program. And I just can't understand that. But anyway, I'm going to stop here. And just expressing my disappointment with the federal government and what they're requiring right now is just crazy.
Just for your information, when we had to come up with this, Louis Daniel asked me to meet with Jean Beasley, and nobody had met with her, and try to get our heads together so we could keep the large mesh fishery open. And Jean and I met several times. Wonderful lady. I really liked her. And we got to be great friends. And but at that time, I was fishing 4,000 yards of flounder net a day. And when her and I got done with what we presented to the commission that needed to be done with this, I took all my flounder net and gave them away because the rules that I set up would not allow me to do it anymore, and that's why I had to go to something else. So you will not find anybody that was affected more by this than I was on the very first day. So just so you know where I'm coming from. And so with that, we're going to go to my favorite, Catherine Bloom, and look at some rules.
Sammy, I believe Jason has a rule suspension update for y'all right before we
Oh,
get
is
to
Jason
Catherine.
before Catherine?
That's right.
I saw rules, and I don't associate Jason with rules. I associate Jason with blue crabs. I'm still in the old days, back in the ancient days when he and I would argue for hours over blue crab.
We can still do that.
Yeah, oh yeah, and we do.
No, this will probably be the quickest talk you hear this meeting. So per division policy, we're required to inform you of any new rule suspensions since your last meeting. Since your last meeting, there have been no rule suspensions. Currently, there are still 9 rules that are suspended indefinitely for various FMP implementations, and that's all contained in the memo that you were provided. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. If not, that's all I have.
You're right, that is the quickest you've ever been up there. Wow.
Thanks.
Thank you, Jason, and we'll move on to Catherine.
Oh, goodness. All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For those who don't know me, I'm Catherine Bloom. I'm the division's rulemaking coordinator for Marine Fishery Commission rules. And today I'm going to provide an update to you on the status of rulemaking in support of your ongoing rulemaking cycles. Unlike most of your business meetings, no action is required for rulemaking at this meeting. So I'll provide an update on the 2 ongoing rulemaking cycles that you have. We'll cover the subjects and next steps for the 2023-2024 and 24-25 rulemaking cycles. And then at the end, there's also an opportunity to address any questions you may have about rules. And as I said, no scheduled action for this meeting. Very rare. First up is the 23-24 cycle. At your May meeting last year, so a year and a half ago now, you approved notice of text for rulemaking to begin the process for a very large package of rules. It was 103 proposed rules. There are 18 of those still pending. They're waiting for a final effective date. So there's 3 subjects that these 18 rules cover. One is shellfish plants and inspections. One is data collection and harassment prevention for the conservation of marine and estuarine resources. And the third and final is conforming changes to shellfish rules and shellfish leases. So let's take a look at the next steps for these remaining rules. This slide shows an overview of the steps required in the rulemaking process. You'll get to see this slide a lot through your different meetings. There's a similar table included in the briefing materials as well. Most of the rules in this package went through the required steps and became effective earlier this year to meet readoption deadlines. These 18 rules remaining in the cycle are near the very end of the process. So these rules are automatically subject to legislative review and are awaiting the next regular legislative session, and that's scheduled to start in early 2025. Once the rules become effective, there'll be a news release issued and the rules will be published in a rulebook supplement. All right, next up is the 24-25 cycle. This is one that started more recently. It may sound very familiar. At your August meeting, you approved notice of text for rulemaking to begin the process. As I said, much smaller package, only 8 rules, much better than 103. These 8 rules also cover 3 different subjects: the Interstate Wildlife Violator Compact, false albacore management, and pot marking requirements. Now let's see where we are in the steps for this package. So same looking table. This slide shows an overview of the steps for the 24-25 package. And again, there's a very similar looking document in your briefing materials. On October 1st of this year, a news release was issued and the proposed rules were published in the North Carolina Register, and that began the public comment process. All of those documents are also in your briefing materials. So we held a public hearing on October 30th at 6 o'clock via WebEx with an in-person listening station at the Division Central District Office in Morehead City. And Commissioner Hobgood just stepped out, but I did want to take a moment to thank him for serving as the hearing officer. We had quite a bit of turnout. 18 members of the public provided comments at the hearing, and so far we have received 12 written comments. All of the speakers and 11 of the 12 written comments are in support of the proposed rule for false albacore management. The outstanding written public comment, the outlier, was against the false albacore rule, but the rationale was that the rule does not go far enough. One of the speakers also expressed support for the proposed Wildlife Violator Compact rules. So the public comment period will close on December 2nd at 5 o'clock. And that's where we are currently for the rulemaking process for this package. Looking ahead, we'll bring all the public comments to you for your February meeting, and that's when you will be asked to vote on final approval of these rules. And then following review and approval at this level, it'll go to the Rules Review Commission. The rules have a proposed earliest effective date of May 1st of next year, except for rules that are automatically subject to legislative review. Now, I have mentioned that twice in this presentation, and yesterday the director also talked about legislative review of rules. As I usually do, and as the director acknowledged that I usually do, these rules are automatically subject to legislative review when they set a criminal penalty or otherwise subject a person to a criminal penalty. This is a change that the General Assembly enacted in 2019, and it provides the opportunity for legislative oversight of any agency with rules that set criminal penalties. And so this additional oversight does add more time to the overall rulemaking process. If you're curious, it's Session Law 2019-198 and General Statute 14-4.1. Everyone knows I like numbers. All right, so once the rules become effective, a news release will be issued and the rules will be published in a rulebook supplement. And for this package, the rules that are automatically subject is only the pot marking requirements rule. So that would have to await the 2026 short session. So we're looking at the summer of '26 as the earliest possible time for that pot marking change. And Mr. Chairman, that's everything I had for my update today. I'm glad to address any questions the commissioners may have. Thank you.
Yes, sir, Tom.
We've had a lot of updates from you over the time. I'm not used to hearing that we get 30 comments regarding a proposed rule. Is that a lot?
It is definitely a lot. Other than the hearing for the temporary mandatory harvest reporting rules, where we had quite a lot of turnout, this hearing represents the largest number of participants we've had in my tenure, which is getting close to 20 years, I'm sad to say. And so it was a lot of turnout and a lot of written comments so far, yes.
Thank you, Catherine. It was a little bit of a rhetorical question, but appreciate it.
She doesn't do that.
Well, I still wanted the answer, but you know.
All right, thank you, Kat.
Mr. Chairman? So
Yes, sir.
at the last Habitat Water Quality Standing Advisory Committee meeting, we were notified that a court ruling related to
For me?
in-present quorums and things like that had required us to bring people together. Did that ever get sorted out, Jesse or Kat, or maybe you know Catherine? The attorney? I mean, now we're talking about Zoom meetings and approvals and that kind of stuff, and I just wondered, given that we had to have an in-person quorum to be able to.
I think Sean Myers got something to say on that.
I hadn't
Or
heard it
perhaps
mentioned.
Sarah.
Hadn't heard it mentioned this meeting.
Yep.
I can try, and then
Oh,
Sean
okay.
will correct me.
Okay.
Which is basically all that's happened since I've been at DOJ, Sean correcting me. So I believe you're talking about a local government case from a few months ago. And so DOJ has looked at that. At this point, what we're advising, and this is mainly for whole commissions, not as much for committees, because of the role commissions and boards have. What we're advising now is that best practice is always to have it in person if possible. But if the chair or there's a need, because some of our commissions have commissioners from across the state, people coming to Raleigh from all over. A lot of times, for hybrid meetings, what we're recommending at this point is that people update, if you have bylaws, to put it in your bylaws. And then also at a meeting where you have if there is a meeting, your next meeting, where you have a quorum of members in person, and again, my understanding is that's not a problem for this particular commission, is that you would go ahead and make a motion to approve anything that had been approved in a hybrid setting, to have you covered both ways. So for example, if you had a hybrid meeting and that minutes were approved or any actions were taken at a meeting where you had everyone in person, quorum, then you would go ahead and say, we make a motion to reapprove everything that was approved at whatever meeting. And so again, it's really more of an issue for commission meetings, less so for committee meetings, because again, those are largely an advisory role. You don't take any action on behalf of the commission. And so that's been DOJ's position at this point. But we're moving forward and seeing where any future litigation goes. Sean, what do you think? Now he has a microphone.
No notes. Great job.
And then I'm gonna say, as chairman of the commission and the guy that puts together all these committees, if they can be done in person, they need to be done in person so we can get our business done like it's supposed to be. They've been done that way for the last 100 years. There's no need in stopping it now, with the exception of the COVID situation. So I would like to encourage everybody that's on the committees, the ACs, to please, let's go there and let's do it in person, because you cannot get the kind of conversation we get here, and you cannot get the kind of representation that we need for the recreational side, the commercial side, sitting there with 4 or 5 people trying to talk into a speaker. I've done it. I'm on the bottlenose dolphin take reduction team, and we have web meetings all the time, and it's, to me, it's not the same, so.
Mr. Chairman,
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Commissioner Hobgood has returned, so I'd like
So you
to
can
gush
thank
on him now
Yeah,
for
but I'm the
doing.
one that put him to doing that, so.
Well, I'll give you credit too then, sir, but Commissioner Hobgood, you did an outstanding job with that hearing. I'd also like to acknowledge two staff that were key to making that happen, and that's Hope Wade and Tina Moore. Thank you so much to everybody. Great job.
Okay, so we got, environmental permit with Kim Hardy.
Sammy, would it be possible for us to take about a 10-minute break to get her presentation pulled up and let everybody?
It surely would be possible.
All right, thank you, Sammy.
Okay, everybody get back to your chairs and see if we can get this done so we can get out of here on time. All right. Kim, are you ready?
No, sir, I'm missing
Okay.
a sheet. Let me go grab that. Sorry, I haven't given a presentation in years and years. I'm a little nervous. Be right back. Okay. Okay, we ready?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Good morning, Commissioners. My name is Kim Harding. I'm a biologist in the Habitat and Enhancement section. I am one of the 2 permit reviewers for coastal development projects in the state. Oops. I am here today to continue our discussion on developing more comprehensive management options for SAV protections brought on by the 2022 Shrimp FMP management issue to close areas to trawling for SAV protections. Staff continue to work through documenting the extent of the MFC's authority on SAV protections and developing potential options in line with the motions passed at the May MFC meeting. In August, Charlie Deaton presented on current SAV sampling programs, research, and management in North Carolina. Today, I will be presenting on how DMF currently protects SAV and other natural resources from impacts caused by coastal development. The Habitat and Enhancement section will continue discussing the importance of SAV by presenting to you in February on the importance of SAV to our commercial and recreational fisheries. I will briefly present some background information on the Environmental Rules Permit Review Program, the roles of the Coastal Resources Commission, the Environmental Management Commission, and the MFC have in the environmental permit review process. I will explain the DMF's goal to avoid, minimize, and mitigate impacts to natural resources. And I will then walk you through a few permit applications I have received. I will now give you some background to understand the program and the process that we perform. The Coastal Area Management Act, the CAMA, was enacted in 1974 and includes 20 counties connected to the coast, either directly or by a watershed. In these 20 counties, rules are applied to development projects that impact the estuarine system, the ocean, public water supplies, and the natural and cultural resource areas. DCM implements and enforces CAMA rules. This is an image of the DCM CAMA handbook. It shows a typical creek in North Carolina. You can see there are boundaries measured from the water to the high ground and distances from coastal wetlands. There are specific rules for each of these AECs, these areas of environmental concern. And this image shows that a natural resource classification, such as this ORW, which is Outstanding Resource Waters, designated from the EMC, and it has its own separate buffer. Development permit applications are circulated to 14 natural resource agencies. 10 North Carolina Division of Environmental Quality agencies and 4 federal agencies provide comments on potential environmental impacts caused by the proposed projects. We review CAMA major, minor, and general permits, DWR 401 buffer permits, Division of Transportation, and Division of DIMLR mine applications, the federal projects under NEPA, environmental impact and environmental assessments, and federal consistency projects by the military, Park Service, or Army Corps of Engineers. The Environmental Review Program focuses on impacts to fish and fish habitats, including the water column. We review projects that impact the habits for coastal fish species at each life history stage, coastal fish at any life stage, including their forage species, fishing activities, including fishing opportunities, and navigation in coastal fishing waters. When we provide comments on a project proposal, we are verifying that the proposal includes avoidance and minimization efforts to impacts caused by the proposed development that fits DEQ rules. Over the past 5 years, our program has reviewed over 1,235 natural resource reviews. This total of permits does not include the numerous recommendations we provide for scoping meetings for state and federal project planning. We often speak to the public before they begin their permitting process so they can receive guidance on the classifications and resources in their project site and what rules would apply to their project. When the project does not fit DEQ rules, the resource agencies provide suggestions or clear instructions for a reconfiguration for less impacts. So these are the numbers of the 5 years that I have been in DMF. And you can see that the rate of denial for development projects is less than 1%. And all the denials occurred in a protected habitat in this period. Some proposals occurred in multiple categories, such as you could be in a P&A and SAV, anadromous fish spawning area, or a P&A. Out of the total number of applications that we provided comments on, around 53% were approved with no revisions needed. This could be that no regulated natural resources were going to be impacted. Some applicants include their own mitigation measures, and other applicants have already received guidance from the natural resource agencies prior to submitting their proposal. Over 45% of these applicants, we worked with the client to minimize the impacts after application submission. So this would be the proposal minimized. 15% of those projects were proposed in SAV habitat, and of those applications, 188 of them, 68%, needed minimization efforts recommended to decrease the proposed impacts. I'm now going to speak on the roles of the 3 DEQ commissions, the CRC, the MFC, and the EMC in the CAMA process. So the general statutes in Chapter 113-8 provide the powers and the duties of DEQ. And in Chapter 113A, Article 7, created the Coastal Management Act and the CRC. Then I'm showing this administrative code for the coastal wetlands and estuarine waters and public trust areas because it provides the definitions of protected resources for all 3 commissions. And it explains how the DEQ agencies work together under the CRC to avoid, minimize, and mitigate impacts while designing development projects. So I just explained how the powers of DEQ are defined and delegated in the general statutes, and they created the Coastal Management Act. In Chapter 143B of the general statutes, the Coastal Habitat Protection Plan is defined, and it's directed that the CRC, the MFC, and the MFC are to provide assistance to write, review, and implement the CHIP. Now we'll speak on the DMF's goal in permit review to avoid, minimize, and mitigate impacts to fish and fish habitats. Okay, I'm just going to give a little disclaimer that some of these images may not be the most clear that I'm going to show, but this is what we deal with in the permit review, and this is what is available to us. Okay. Our first is to avoid impacts, including public trust waters. This is an image from an application for a boat lift. This is in Hampstead, Pinner County off ICW. I've circled resources that were identified to avoid. I've circled, let's see, you'll see oysters in the yellow circles, and in the green circles, you'll see large SAV beds immediately adjacent to the shoreline. A boat lift would need to be designed to avoid those areas. Not only is where the actual structure placement important to identify, you must identify the path to deeper waters. This path crosses over sensitive areas in multiple places. However, there is a path that avoids the oyster reefs and SAV beds. The second image shows how the boat lift was oriented to avoid the reef and minimize the boat ingress and egress impacts. This boat lift was built in 2013, and I learned about this project when I came to do a site investigation for their neighbor's property. You can see how much that SAV bed expanded in all directions. These are the conditions I observed, and these are the conditions that I reviewed their application. The applicant did not have sufficient water depths of 2 feet at normal water level, which is very similar to mean low water or slack tide. And this is the minimum depth, 2 foot, required for a boat lift in SAV habitat. For the second application, they could only build a fixed platform instead of the boat lift or the floating dock. That is the minimization effort applied to this proposal to protect SAV. And to be honest, this is a case that is hardest when I come across. On the surface, the decision does not seem to be consistent. The neighbor was allowed a boat lift, this other neighbor is not. However, every review is an independent investigation and is site-specific. And as well, they are reviewed by humans, and the investigation methods could have been different. I can't say on this, but this is what the outcome. The mitigation that I'm speaking of to impacts to coastal resources is generally not permitted by the CRC. The project must have a clear benefit to the public, such as Department of Transportation projects. This is the Bonner Bridge, Highway 12 over Oregon Inlet, the replacement project in 2013. There was about a half a hectare, a little over 1 acre of SAV impacted. So DOT was required to mitigate and follow the state's no net loss of natural resources for transportation projects. 150-meter wave attenuating Atlantic reef maker structure was constructed near the inlet in the Pamlico Sound. This structure offers mitigation by providing a break in the wind and the wave energy and provides a shelter area so the SAV is protected and can grow. This reef maker structure is made of materials that facilitate oyster growth to increase the value of mitigation through enhancement. Now, the impact was over 1 acre, but there was only 150 meters of structure built. So in this 1-to-1 no net loss, they incorporated this area of how, of where the SAV can expand and grow.
Can I just
Yes, ma'am.
say something? I fish around that every day, and it's incredible. It's been incredibly effective. You can see a plume of SAV growing, basically between it and the bridge. It's very noticeable.
Yeah, it's wonderful. I've been able to see it as well.
Thank you.
It's great. Thank you. Okay. I will now provide some examples of project proposals I have reviewed and how the review process of avoidance and minimization works. The first project site is in Middle Sound off Final Landing Road in New Hanover County. I received this project proposal for a 4-slip docking facility that would require the dredging of this marsh basin to connect to an existing permitted boat channel. Oops, there it is. The applicant is asking for a similar configuration to the facility to the north. While doing my research, I found that this dredge channel was created before the 1980s, and the permit was renewed in 2018 when this docking facility was built. I conducted a site visit and found a mixed muddy sandy substrate with an active shellfish bed inside the proposed dredge channel and coastal wetlands surrounding the project area. You can see the circle. I will now go over the, let's see, sorry, oh my gosh. I will now go over the different rules of the 3 commissions that went into the review of this application. This project was proposed with dredge through shellfish habitat and close by coastal wetlands. So first, the MFC provides the definitions and the designations of the coastal natural resources and nursery areas. This project site includes impacts to public trust, fishing waters, shellfish habitat, coastal wetlands, and soft muddy bottom habitat. The CRC is responsible for defining and implementing the rules for coastal development, ensuring adverse impacts to public trust waters and natural resources do not occur. In this review, the CRC provides a guidance for dredge projects to avoid natural resources, including shellfish habitat as defined by the MFC and referenced in rule. The EMC rules designate water classifications that indicate the function of the water body and determines its protections. This water body holds 2 classifications, SA and ORW. Both classifications are high-quality water and based on the characterization of shellfish habitat in the water body. The ORW, or Outstanding Resource Water Classification, is based on outstanding fish habitat and fisheries. I mentioned that 14 natural resource agencies review various applications in the 20 CAMA counties. I worked very closely with a few of those agencies to draft consistent recommendations for many projects to ensure the avoidance and minimization of natural resources, and that would be DWR, which is our Water Resources, Wildlife Resources Commission, the Army Corps of Engineers, and National Marine Fisheries Service. We write recommendations under the guidance of CRC rules to avoid adverse impacts to natural resources defined by the MFC. The EMC's anti-degradation policy is to ensure the function of the water body is not removed, and the MFC's responsibility to conserve, protect, and regulate the estuarine resources of the state. The natural resource agencies did not find this proposal to be consistent with the rules of the 3 commissions. I'm sorry, I went too fast. The dredging would have removed shellfish habitat and degraded the water classification SA by removing habitat supporting shellfish. We recommended that they build their docking facility consistent to the neighbors to the south. By extending the pier and placing the boat slips into deeper water, the dredging component was not necessary. The next example is another dredge proposal, this time near mapped SAV beds. This property is in Middle Sound off Atlantic Drive in Wilmington. This applicant stated that the high sand shoals formed between their facility and the ICW, blocking access during much of the tide cycle. The pink polygon next to the docking facility is our SAV layer. That includes all SAV mapping events from 1981 to 2021. The mapping event showed here was in 2015. I want to show you that when I remove the SAV polygon, it aligns with imagery. Please make note of the absence of SAV waterward, and I did not find any presence of SAV on my site investigation in 2022. This is a copy of the proposed dredge footprint. You can see it extends into the SAV polygon. The rules applied to this project include the CRC rules to avoid natural resources, SAV, which is defined by the MFC and referenced in rule that SAV habitat is any confirmed SAV habitat in the last 10 years. Confirmation can be ground surveys or through imagery. The EMC rules for ORW specifically prohibit dredging of SAV habitat by the MFC and reference in rule. The agencies did not find this proposal to be consistent with rules. The project proposed the direct removal of SAV habitat. This is against all three commission's rules. Directly dredging mapped SAV habitat is a direct removal and would degrade the habitat and cause significant adverse impacts with no public benefits. The MSC rules give a clear definition of SAV habitat. The EMC's rule is not as clear because it's based on the water quality of the SAV habitat. So this can protect the entire water body as potential SAV habitat. We recommended avoidance and minimization to SAV beds by reducing the dredge footprint of the defined SAV habitat provided by the MFC. The process of minimizing a proposed impact can satisfy both the CRC and the EMC conditions in preventing adverse impacts. The access channel was decreased from 50 feet to 30 feet wide, and a buffer was observed around the mapped SAV bed to ensure that any suitable habitat is left for the SAV to return and expand and to prevent the SAV habitat from sloughing into the dredge channel. I have one more CAMA application review example I'd like to share dealing with primary nursery areas. This is a property on Davis Canal in Oak Island in Brunswick County. You can see from this picture that the canal is very shallow and the floating dock is sitting on the muddy bottom for many hours every day. They proposed to reconfigure their floating dock and add a boat lift. The reported water depths at the site were confirmed to be less than 1 foot. You can see it's 11 inches, quoted everywhere on the design. Davis Canal is a designated P&A. The MFC designates primary nursery areas as an important area for juvenile fish to grow. The bottom is an important component to that nursery area, and protections are given to prevent the removal of that important habitat. The CRC and the EMC give extra protections for P&As. CRC rules list P&A as a protected resource to avoid and prevent adverse impacts to. The CRC has specific rules for minimum water depths for structures over these protected resources that we've been discussing today: shellfish beds, SAV, and P&As. The EMC designates all P&As at high-quality waters, and Davis Canal is also SA for shellfishing waters. Because of the small scope of this project, it qualified for a general permit, meaning that it does not go out to the 14 different agencies for review. However, if DCM gets a general permit application for a floating structure in less than 18 inches at normal low water or a formalized boat slip in less than 2 feet at normal low water over shellfish beds, SAV, or P&A, DMF must be consulted, like I was for this proposal. I did not find this proposal to be consistent with rules. So for avoidance and minimization efforts to P&A rules, I recommended that the applicant remove the boat slip since there was 0 inches of water at normal low water and is not consistent with P&A rules. I recommended they build a new floating dock that includes physical barriers that keep the structure at 18 inches above the substrate. Their existing floating dock was sitting on the mud, smothering invertebrates and the algae. So if the applicant builds a new floating dock that is not consistent with rules, but by adding minimization efforts and keeping it off the bottom, they minimize their existing impact and did not compound it as originally proposed. Lastly, I would like to now describe a unique strategy for managing a huge infrastructure project around SAV beds. This is Hatteras Inlet. The ferry route between Ocracoke and Hatteras Islands must follow this very long horseshoe-shaped route to follow a deep water channel to minimize impacts to SAV beds around the inlet by decreasing the number of times the channel needs to be dredged. This project has 3 different permitted dredge footprints, 2 federal permits and 1 county. This image labels the federal permitted channel in blue and the state permit in red. This is also what the ferry route looked like before 2013 when it was reconfigured to the existing path. Dare County holds the permit for the segment that needs to be dredged the most during the year. This segment needs to be dredged 4 to 6 times per year. The deep water channel moves around in this area frequently, so they permitted this large area that can be that they can have their discretion to dig in any part of this area to follow the deep water. This is a highly non-typical format. Dredge footprints are typically a fixed distance and fixed depth. And Hatteras Inlet is surrounded by extensive SAV beds shown in these green polygons around the dredge footprint. And to prevent adverse impacts to SAV, resource agencies have placed an in-water work moratorium on the dredge work. Hopper dredges cause increased turbidity, and the work window prevents the extra turbidity during the SAV peak growing season. This work restriction created a hardship for the area's economy and safety. So the Army Corps of Engineers worked with the natural resource agencies to develop minimization efforts to allow the dredging to occur when it needs to. The SAV beds were surveyed and distances from the dredge channel were measured and documented. An agreement between the resource agencies and the Army Corps of Engineers was reached by continuing to use those moratorium windows. However, this is with a combination of using buffers and the windows. The dredging can occur year-round. The typical moratorium period used in the North Carolina estuarine system is April 1st to September 30th. This covers most migrations of our coastal marine species and peak growing seasons for SAV around Hatteras Inlet. The agencies decided on using buffers of 100 feet and 300 feet, depending on the time of year. If the dredging occurs during the estuarine waters moratorium, a 300-foot buffer is used. If outside the moratorium, a 100-foot buffer is observed. I put together a few images of SAV with the buffers to observe the differences in peak growth and distances from the dredge path. I will focus on these 2 SAV beds. And the Army Corps of Engineers is proposing to evaluate the SAV prior to each dredging event and will avoid the side casting of the dredged material within proximity to the SAV. They conduct the dredging and then send the report that includes the area and the depth of the dredge event to the natural resource agencies. So these are the SAV beds that I drew this really quick. It's not a perfect polygon. I did not use ArcGIS to do this, so it's not gorgeous. Okay, so this is April. This is the beginning month of the moratorium, and you can see the SAV is dark and healthy, peak season. In August, it's already starting to kind of go dormant. Let's see, the yellow line is the 300-foot buffer. The pink line is the 100-foot buffer, and the green line is the line that I drew around SAV bed. September, you can see it's starting to recede more. This is at nearing the end of the growing season in 2009. It's still really healthy there. This year in November, it receded. This is in February, receded much. And then March of 2006, the SAV is barely visible, opposed to this March where it is very healthy and goes out past the buffers that would have been for this SAV bed. So commissioners, thank you for letting me come and present some very important work that DMF performs that many people are not aware of. I would like to remind you that our mission is not to prevent development in our protected natural resource areas. It is to work with the applicant for a successful project that avoids and minimizes impacts to those natural resources. We do that through a collaborative process with 14 other agencies. We all work under the CRC rules, but those statutes rely on the MFC definitions and designations in rules. Thank you again for your time, and I'll take any questions you may have.
Yes, sir.
Comment. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, that was really great, Kim. Thanks. I just want to make sure that everyone's aware, and I agree, first of all, having been in the belly of this beast myself for close to 10 years, right after the Marine Fisheries Reform Act, this commission actually had the Habitat and Water Quality Standing Advisory Committee meeting on a subcommittee of that committee, advisory panel committee, meeting on a monthly basis to review these permits in league with this apparatus. And it was, in my view, a really successful process whereby all these agencies could work together to get the job done. And what I particularly found is that people have a tendency to look at the low percentage of permits that are denied, and that's actually not the success is in the ones that don't get denied, that get adjusted to accommodate the needs of marine and estuarine resources. And in combination with this really fabulous architecture at the state level, the federal agencies also add on. So a lot of these are federal permits or delegated federal permits, and therefore the federal fisheries architecture is also empowered to protect what they call essential fish habitat, and the highest tier, most valuable of the essential fish habitat, which they call habitat areas of particular concern. And I'll just tell you, when the South Atlantic Council established that program following the 96 Act, they basically took all of these designations coming from the three commissions here and adopted them as in the federal context. So that empowers federal agencies to actually deny permits or to comment on permits. And I think this is probably the best example in the country of different agencies working together and also with the federal agencies to get the job done without unduly penalizing citizens for their ability to enjoy those resources directly or indirectly. So I think it's really great, and I really look forward to hearing more input as we move forward in this journey about protecting key habitats. that was a bit of a soapbox, I guess, Mike.
Thank you, Doug. Yeah, Mike?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You know, I think y'all do a great job at what you're tasked to do by law, which is take from the shoreline into the water and create, you know, or mitigate anything that is going to be destructive or whatever. I think and I think we're good at that process. This definitely outlines that. I think what the state really needs to take a look at is what goes on from the shoreline in. Because there's not a process that says we don't need a parking lot here. There's not a process that says we don't need to build all this concrete structure from the shoreline in. It just doesn't happen that way. And so all your rain on runoff events, all this stuff that happens is affected more so inland and runs to the estuaries and the waterways versus what happens at the edge of the water out. And so what's important here is that, from what I'm taking away, is that we're good at what we're doing right now for, you know, this part of it, but we're not really that good at it from the edge of the water in. And so I think, you know, the state of North Carolina really, and I've said this before, really needs to take a look at what happens when you build, you know, infrastructure, shopping malls, grocery stores, all this stuff. You know, when you spread all of that out and start building it in every little place that's going to run off into a waterway, then you're saturating areas more and more and more, and you're not letting those natural filter processes that happen inland take place for the water that runs back to the estuary. And I think as being out there a lot, you know, and I hear Sammy say this a lot, you know, if you come riding my boat, the same for me. If you come riding my boat after significant rain events and runoffs, I can show you things that happen that shouldn't happen, you know. And so I'd like to see the state get better at what happens more inland and how those drainage systems that they approve and set up that they think are wonderful, all that does is ditch the water back to the waterway. And so it's not filtering anymore. And, you know, matter of fact, riding up here, it was raining for the first time in a long time. And so I stopped at the little rest area between New Bern and Washington there. And because there's nothing to stop and use the restroom at from Williamston to New Bern. And so I stopped, and what caught my eye when I immediately opened the door of my truck was the oil sheen running through the gutter system. I mean, it was immediately noticeable. And so I'm like, yeah, that's great. That's going to run completely back to some creek, and it's going to go into water, and there's nothing that's going to filter that before it gets there. And so I've tried to point this out over time when I get a chance to talk about habitat and chime in a little bit. But, you know, I think it's great that we're doing great things with our permitting processes from the edge of the water to however far. But from the edge of the water inland, we're not doing that great of a job, in my opinion. And so I'd like to see the state and agencies take a look at, you know, more permitting and what goes on to filter the water that we haven't done such a great job at.
May I respond? I believe that's on a county level. It's not a state level. And by working with different counties, you do see some counties do a better job than others.
Yes, sir.
Sorry about this, but, so I think that disjunction was the whole reason that we ended up with coastal habitat protection. Actually, I know it was. I helped write the law, that part of the law. And to encourage the three commissions that have authority at development at the scales at which they do have authority is, I mean, the CRC rules do apply within areas of environmental concern, which is what AEC stands for. And those are predicated on the prevalence of the existence of outstanding resource waters or PNAs or SAV or things that we define and help get designated so the things interact. What I'm getting at is that we've made some steps forward from what it was before that was required, and that those plans are impressive. But right now is a fabulous time to be thinking about it because the next version of the chip is coming up now. It's beginning right now. And so all three staffs of all three of these commissions are going to be working together at your direction to identify priorities for better, to be addressed better. So I guess, I don't want to speak for you, Sarah, but I will. We would love to have input from any of you as members in terms of identifying what priorities we should identify for working with this architecture among the commissions to do better. So, and if we can find things where there are opportunities to do stuff now, then this next iteration of the chip would be a great place to make those real. And I'm not going to speak for the secretary either, but I know I would expect that she would be happy with her staff to work with all three of us commissions within our purview and our governance authority to identify places where we can do a better job. So it's a perfect time, Mike, to bring up those issues and help us to find a way to make it real.
Yes, sir.
I would just like to say too, I think on the Marine Fisheries Commission, we're being asked to, we're the end users here, and we're asked to make big adjustments in how we fish, where we fish, when we fish, how much we can keep. And a lot of it's based on our water quality, that it's the big gorilla in the room that we can never directly address. And it affects all of us, and it unifies all of us. And it really would be good to finally put some teeth into CHIP and really kind of have a say in what's going on with our water quality.
I think they are listening. So just for instance, the three commissions together identified SAV habitat as for priority under the last CHIP. And we feel like maybe we're out ahead on that, but the truth is the Environmental Management Commission is, hopefully they'll do it, is making progress and leading towards the water quality standards for SAV waters that would be necessary in order to promote the long-term persistence and expansion of those beds. So that's a protracted process to put a water quality standard in place, and it's subject to all kinds of review even at that point. And I don't know what the EMC, do you have any idea what the EMC schedule is for that? January. Yeah, so they're working hard on that and have been in concert. And from having been contacted by CRC members, I know they're really quite interested in doing what they can with our designations and the EMC's water quality standards, and that then leads to development change. And the county land use plans under CAMA have to be consistent with the state rules. And those don't necessarily dictate the specifics of every single development activity on lots, but the broad-scale development plans do. And so the lands that are close enough to drain directly to shellfish waters or SAV habitat or PNAs and SNAs and our other nursery habitats, natterers and other things, can directly cascade into tightening individual development criteria and aggregate development effects, and particularly when they're operating under delegated federal permits for wetlands, for all the discharge and non-discharging water pollution permitting system is also a delegated federal permit under the National Pollution Discharge Elimination System program. So we have more power than I think we think, Mike, and help us find the most important targets to help pushing into this system.
Thank you, Kim. Yes, sir. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It seems like we have a lot of interest in water quality here, and I was just curious if the commission, something that I can do is potentially talk to our Department of Environmental Quality, Division of Water Resources folks and see if maybe one of them can come give a presentation to the commission about some of our water quality permitting processes. Is that something that Chairman Corby, y'all would like to see?
Yeah, that's fine with me. I'm sure.
Maybe a step higher, so the classification and water quality standards and classification systems that then lead to regulations and programs.
Why don't you see what you can come up with who can come and get back to me, and we'll go from there. How about that?
That sounds perfect.
All right, so issues from commissioners. Mr. Roller. Well, you told me you had one, so I went to you first.
Mine's quick.
Go ahead, eh?
Mine's quick. So we made a request for something, white paper on Bonita, and I'd like to, I'd like for us to have that for the February meeting so that we can start some kind of management plan at that February meeting. My number one objective would be to implement some kind of bag limit to, eliminate the egregious harvest from recreational fishermen on Bonita. So that's really my only issue request.
Okay, Tom.
So just back, Commissioner Hobgood on that one, I would hopefully like to see that sooner than later. I would point out a couple things here. There was a white paper of coastal landings done that was presented on the ASMFC. There is a lot of information out there already. The existing rule language exists. I hope that was not. I tried to make that motion as to be as small a lift as possible, and would point out that I believe MREP landings from last year, Bonita, were up several 100% North Carolina. So I do think there is a little bit of urgency to go forward with that. The second one that I want to bring up is, and I hate to keep beating a dead horse here, but to talk about the South Atlantic permits, right? I really appreciate the paper done by staff. It took a long time. It really captured my argument that I made for addressing that. But what I was really asking for was, how do we do it without joint enforcement authority? And I don't think we really addressed that. One of the conversations I had with Marine Patrol was like, well, we're already enforcing some of these other federal permits. Why can't we do it that way? And when I asked that question on the record, I was told, I don't know why we do it. So I would like to look at that again, and I would also like to look to see if there's a way to do it through the interjurisdictional or plan or whatever. So, Commissioner Rader, you brought that up as well.
A quick follow-up, if you don't mind, Mr. Chairman.
Well, and to follow up on what, the question Tom just asked of why we regulate some things and we can't do that, is because what they're regulating with the other stuff like grouper and snapper and that is because we also have the same size limit on those things, and so they have something to regulate as to where Atlantic Bonita or what, or your license, we don't have anything on that. Am I wrong, Kat, or?
Well, so the permits that we talked about that we do on the commercial side, really what we're regulating is the sale, which happens at the dock. So that is why we can enforce that. So that is the reason for that. And as I said yesterday, it's not that we can't. I mean, I think we can issue a proclamation that would require those permits. We'll double check on that. We can do it, but the enforcement piece of that is going to be almost non-existent.
Yes, sir, Doug.
Yeah, quickly, what I was most interested in, Director, was the intersection between what we do and can do and what the federal council advised system does and doesn't, can't. In other words, is this the only such federal action that right now is not integrating well into the management and enforcement systems? So you don't have to answer now. I would like to know how this fits in with opportunities to better nest, coordinate, integrate our management system and the federal systems, plural, so that the Compact Commission, ASMC, and then also the council-advised systems, but including this very particular one. And then if there are opportunities there that can systematically enhance that coordination that way. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, and I don't know if there are other things. There may be other things out there that we don't mirror for various reasons. I mean, I don't know that. We'll have to look into that. But
And
you
just
know,
to be
the-
really clear, to me, the enforcement question is separate. The resource question is separate too. It's related, but what we ought to do to be able to amplify the management systems that are happening at a higher scale. I mean, we're part of the South Atlantic. We ought to be endorsing and fully implementing their programs.
Yeah, and so the IJFMP is set up for us to work that, to do exactly that.
Right,
So-
which is why I made the comment the
Yeah.
other day. And so I just want to know if there's a pathway to be able to do a better job on that and other needs for coordinating that system? And if there is, what is it?
Yeah, and although I kind of get what you're saying about the enforcement piece being separate, it really isn't. But I do think, when we talked about this yesterday as well, that there is a potential that if we feel like this is a real issue that we need to address, that we should be able to get, some cooperation from National Marine Fisheries Service to focus on, for NOAA to focus on some of this as an enforcement piece, to work with our officers to do that. And we can certainly, we can look into that as
Great.
well.
We can talk later, but let's, anyway, if you don't mind giving
Yes,
us
Tom.
further advice on that, that'd be great.
And thank you for that, Commissioner Rader. In lieu of all of that, we've had a lot of discussions over the years. I would at least like to see some sort of outreach component to the fleet so people understand from us that they need these. If there really is an ask, which I don't believe that. I believe that if you're in this industry, you should know you need these permits. They've been around for a long time. And if you talk to anyone in the industry, most people know you need them. I think there's a deliberate effort to not have them by some people. So I'd at least like to see some sort of education component, because as we've identified in previous discussions and as was identified in the white paper, if we are underrepresented in these permits, it is sincerely jeopardizing the future economic viability of the fleet.
Okay. Yes, ma'am.
Just one more comment about the Atlantic Bonita. It's on our list. You will not get that in February. I apologize, but I don't know what else to tell you. We are struggling with hiring. And Jason talked about this yesterday. I just stole 3 of his people. And those vacancies are still there, and amongst other ones. So we've got it on the list. We're working on Black Drum and Sheep's Head, and Bonita is on the list, and we'll get to it as soon as we can.
Okay, Willie.
I am a new commissioner, so I acknowledge this is probably a very elementary type question, but I'd ask, when we were talking about the $5.6 million speckled trout that were being taken in a year, and I'd ask, well, how many speckled trout do we think are out there? And I didn't find the answer to that question. Can anyone tell me where one finds estimated volumes of speckled trout, drum, whatever, in the North Carolina waters? Is there a place to go to see estimates of those volumes?
Our stock assessment should give estimates of abundance, and I think Melinda and, Luke, yep, there they go.
And to think I almost didn't come today. So I think exactly like Director Rawls was saying, our stock assessments will give estimates of spawning stock biomass, which I think is the important distinction there. Spawning stock biomass just being the number or the biomass of mature females, estimated biomass of mature females in the population. To expand that out to a total biomass, I'm not sure that our stock assessments really do that, or that we would have a great idea of what that number would be. Like when you're talking like all the juvenile fish, all the male fish as well, the focus in a stock assessment tends to be on that spawning stock biomass, because mature female fish for the vast majority of fish populations are the bottleneck. That's what slows things down.
And another thing, a lot of those fish that we're catching now were living in Virginia this summer as they move this way, as that water starts getting colder,
They are. Yep, for spotted sea trout, that's
tails,
seasonal
they go,
movement. Yep.
So it would be hard. I would think it would be really hard to say this is how many we think's in our water because there might not be but so many today, and then tomorrow a big push comes out of Virginia, and
Well, and for the stock assessment, it is, that does include Virginia fish as well. So that is an assessment of the North Carolina and Virginia stock. It's considered
It does show
one
age
stock.
structure, the relative prevalence and age for each of the species and all those things. So, I mean, you could do it guessing at, sex ratios and age structure. You could, if you needed that number, you could come up with it. But the spawning stock biomass and the relative take out of that is the most important.
Exactly.
all right.
You could grab me offline and show me how to get to that, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Just want to say goodbye.
Yes, ma'am.
For such a great discussion. Took a lot of notes and have some follow-ups, and definitely want to thank the division and the director for all the hard work here that kind of gives the basis for you all to have these discussions at the policy level. So appreciate all the work.
Yeah, thank you for putting up with us for 3 days, okay? Okay, Jesse, you got assignments and stuff that you want to go through?
I do, yes, sir, Chairman. So there was a request for an issue paper on the management of Atlantic bonito specific to implementing a bag limit in that fishery, or recreational bag limit in that fishery. There was a request to look deeper at the possibility of state enforcement for federal for-hire permits, as well as exploring ways to better coordinate state management and federal council and commission management. And this wasn't a request from this meeting, but Commissioner Rader, in previous meetings, you've requested some updates on kind of how climate change and sea level rise and global warming is being incorporated into other fisheries. And I've been coordinating with some folks from NOAA about trying to get someone down to give a presentation on that. At your next meeting, I'm happy to announce that meeting is actually in Kitty Hawk. That's February 19th through the 21st. It's at the Hilton Garden Inn in Kitty Hawk. At that meeting, you'll receive input that was given during the legislative review of the draft amendment to the Spotted Sea Trout FMP, and there will be a vote on final adoption of that plan. You'll receive a presentation on the draft of the focused Amendment 4 to the Southern Flounder FMP and vote to send it out for public and advisory committee review. You'll receive a presentation on the public and advisory committee review of the draft oyster and clam fishery management plans and select your preferred management options for those two plans. And lastly, you'll review the public comments received and vote on final approval of the rules related to false albacore management, simplifying pot marking requirements, and the Interstate Wildlife Violator Compact. And Trish touched on it a little bit in her update yesterday, but we've also been in talks with folks from NOAA MRIP about potentially coming to the February meeting and doing a listening session on some of the re-envisioning process that MRIP is going through right now.
Okay, with that, that's it. We're adjourned.